Welcome to Cosmic Tales, a show about the myths, history, and science hidden in the night sky. I'm your host, Diana, and together we'll explore the cosmos one tale at a time. Directly beneath Orion's feet, tucked into the winter sky between the Great Hunter above and Canis Major, with brilliant Sirius shining to the south, sits a small constellation that many people have probably looked right past without ever noticing. This is Lepus, the Hare, and it has almost everything working against it. It has no first magnitude stars and rarely gets the attention given to its famous neighbors. It sits in one of the most spectacular regions of the entire sky, surrounded by Orion, Canis Major, Canis Minor, Eridanus, and Monoceros, and manages to disappear into the background. Which is fitting, perhaps, for a creature whose entire mythological identity is based on being hunted. Because there it is, a hare crouched forever beneath Orion's feet, frozen in the moment before the chase begins. Either that's a coincidence of celestial cartography or one of the most elegant visual metaphors in the entire sky. But Lepus has more to offer than its position beneath the Great Hunter. Hidden within this small constellation is one of the most dramatically colored stars visible through a telescope, the Crimson Star, also known as Hind's Crimson Star. When astronomer John Russell Hind described it in 1845, he called it the most beautiful object in the heavens. Its deep red color makes it one of the most striking stars amateur astronomers can find. Lepus is also home to Messier 79, a globular cluster with a surprising history. Unlike most globular clusters that formed as part of the Milky Way, Messier 79 may have come from somewhere else entirely, a group of ancient stars captured from another galaxy long ago. But before we get to the stars and the science, there's a question worth asking. What does it mean to be the hare beneath the hunter's feet, the creature that has been running for thousands of years and has somehow never been caught? Let's dive into the ancient drama that turned a group of stars into a legend. The idea of this constellation being a hare appears to be one of the oldest traditions in Greek astronomy. Both Eratosthenes and Hyginus wrote about it, and it was included in Ptolemy's catalog as part of the great winter scene surrounding Orion. The Greeks gave this hare a very specific role. It was the animal Orion hunted. The image was simple. Orion moved across the winter sky with his two dogs, Canis Major and Canis Minor, following behind him, while beneath his feet crouched the hare. Unlike many constellations with a detailed myth attached, the hare's meaning came from the picture itself. It was a story frozen in place. Orion raised his club, the dogs waited, the hare crouched. The chase was always about to begin, but it never did. This idea of an eternal, unfinished chase appears again and again in Greek sky stories. We saw it in the previous episode with Laelaps and the Tumessian fox, a dog destined to always catch its prey, pursuing a fox destined never to be caught. Zeus could only solve the impossible contradiction by freezing both animals in stone and placing them in the sky. The Greeks seemed fascinated by these moments of suspended action, the pursuit that never ends, the goal that is always just out of reach. The sky was full of them. Scorpius chased Orion, although the two constellations were placed so they never appeared together. The Pleiades fled from Orion forever, always rising and setting in their endless escape. And now the hare remained forever beneath the hunter's feet, caught in the moment before the hunt began. Greek mythology understood something very human about pursuit, the wanting, the chasing, and the strange space between desire and fulfillment. But there is another tradition connected to Lepus, one that is much less famous, much more specific, and in some ways even more interesting than the image of Orion chasing a hare across the sky. This isn't a story about gods, heroes, or divine punishment. It's a story about people, animals, and the consequences of a very understandable idea that went very, very wrong. The story came from the Greek island of Leros, a small island in the Aegean Sea, and it began with one person and one female hare. Someone brought a hare to the island and thought it would be wonderful to have one around. It's easy to understand why. Hares are charming, they're graceful, they look harmless. A single hare hopping around the countryside probably seemed like a delightful addition to the island. Then other people saw the hare and thought, that's a great idea, we should have more of those. And the hares, being hares, agreed with this plan enthusiastically. They reproduced, and kept reproducing with the kind of dedication that has made rabbits and hares famous for their ability to turn just a few into far too many remarkably quickly. Before long, Leros had a problem. Then it had a much bigger problem. The hare population exploded. The animals ate through crops, damaged fields, and threatened the island's food supply. What had started as a charming idea, wouldn't it be nice to have a few hares, had turned into an ecological disaster. The hares weren't doing anything wrong, they were simply being hares. The people of Leros, however, had made a mistake that would feel very familiar today. They had introduced a new animal to their island without understanding what would happen when that animal multiplied. They weren't trying to cause harm, they saw something they liked and wanted more of it. But they had not considered what that pleasant idea would look like on a much larger scale. Eventually, the islanders drove the hares into the sea and restored some balance to their farms. But the story remained, and according to this tradition, the hare was placed among the stars not just as Orion's prey, but as a reminder of what happened on Leros. And the lesson feels quite modern. The problem wasn't cruelty, the mistake wasn't malicious. It was simply a failure to see what would happen next. One hare seemed harmless. 1,000 hares eating your crops? That was a disaster. The only difference is time. Lepus became a reminder that even good ideas need to be considered all the way through. Some things are wonderful in small amounts. Some things are disastrous when they multiply, and sometimes the distance between those two is nothing more than a little time, and an animal that is exceptionally good at making more copies of itself. The people of Leros learned that lesson the hard way. The hare in the sky makes sure the lesson lasts forever. The hare in the sky has another story to tell. Long before the lunar rabbit traditions of East and Southeast Asia took the forms we recognize today, there was the Sasa Jataka, an ancient Buddhist tale from India that became the foundation of those later stories. The Jataka tales tell the stories of the Buddha's previous lives, the many incarnations through which the Bodhisattva, the being who would eventually become the Buddha, developed the wisdom and compassion needed for enlightenment. In one of those lives, the Bodhisattva was a hare. The story began with 4 friends, a hare, a monkey, an otter, and a jackal. They lived together in the forest and followed the Buddhist teaching that on holy days, one should practice generosity and give to those in need. They agreed that if a hungry traveler came to them, they would offer whatever food they could find. The monkey found fruit, the otter found fish, the jackal found food left behind by a farmer. But the hare had a problem. The hare ate only grass, and grass was not something a hungry visitor would find very filling or tasty. So the hare decided that if someone came to him needing food, he would offer the only thing he had, himself. It was the ultimate act of generosity, giving everything, holding nothing back. When the hare made this decision, Sakka, the ruler of the heaven of the 33 gods, noticed. He wanted to know whether the hare truly meant to do what he had decided to do, so he disguised himself as a hungry holy man and came to test the animals. The monkey, otter, and jackal each freely offered what they had. Then he came to the hare. The hare told him, "I have nothing to give you but myself. Build a fire, and I will become your food." Sakka built the fire. Before jumping in, the hare shook itself 3 times, not to prepare itself, but to make sure there were no tiny insects hiding in its fur that might be harmed by the flames. That small detail is what makes the story so powerful. Even while offering its own life, the hare was still thinking about protecting the smallest creatures around it. But the fire was not real. Sakka had made the flames harmless. The test was never about whether the hare would burn. It was about whether the hare was truly willing to give everything. And it was. To preserve the memory of this act, Sakka placed the image of the hare on the face of the moon, where all beings could see it and remember what true generosity looked like. The story traveled across Asia with Buddhism, changing as it entered new cultures while preserving the same central idea, that the rabbit earned its place on the moon through an extraordinary act of selfless compassion. In China, the hare became the jade rabbit, companion of the moon goddess Chang'e, who prepares the elixir of immortality. In Japan, it became Tsuki no Usagi, the moon rabbit making rice cakes in the lunar glow. Different cultures changed the details, but the heart of the story remained the same. A rabbit looked up at a hungry world and gave everything it had. And that creates a fascinating contrast with the Greek tradition of Lepus. To the Greeks, the hare was the animal beneath Orion's feet, the quarry that was forever about to be caught. To the people of Leros, it became a warning about what happens when a small idea grows beyond control. To the Buddhist tradition, it became a symbol of the greatest possible generosity. The hare in the winter sky sits quietly beneath Orion as it always has, but what it means depends on the story you bring when you look up. So, what exactly are we looking at when we look at Lepus? The most remarkable star in Lepus is not the brightest one. It is not the one with the most impressive name. It is a small, unassuming point of light called R. Leporis, and it may be one of the strangest stars in the entire winter sky. This is the star known as the Crimson Star, or Hind's Crimson Star, named after British astronomer John Russell Hind, who discovered it in 1845 and was clearly impressed by what he was seeing, with good reason. The Crimson Star is a carbon star, which means it is a star near the end of its life that has produced an unusual amount of carbon in its outer layers. That carbon changes the way a star's light reaches us. It absorbs much of the blue and green light, leaving mostly reds and oranges behind. The result is not just a slightly reddish star, it is a star that looks like it's glowing from within. Observers often compare it to a tiny ember floating in the darkness, a deep, almost unnatural red that looks completely different from familiar red stars like Betelgeuse or Antares. But the Crimson Star has another trick. It is a variable star, meaning it changes brightness over time. Over a cycle of about 14 months, it slowly brightens and fades. And strangely enough, the deeper red it becomes, the fainter it is. At its brightest, it is one of the reddest objects in the sky and can be seen with a small telescope. At its dimmest, it nearly disappears, but when you catch it at the right time, it is unforgettable. It looks less like a distant sun and more like a tiny piece of glowing coal suspended in space. And the Crimson Star is not just putting on a beautiful display, it is also in the final stages of its life, shedding material back into space. Some of that carbon combines with oxygen, changing the chemistry of the star's atmosphere into the reason it looks like a glowing red ember. That carbon will eventually become part of future stars, planets, and somewhere down the line, perhaps even living things. The crimson star is a dying star, but it is leaving behind the ingredients for what comes after. The brightest star in Lepus is Arneb, whose name comes from the Arabic word for hare, so at least everyone agreed on what animal they were looking at. Arneb is a very different kind of star. Where our Lepus is small-looking but visually unusual, Arneb is a true giant, a white supergiant about 2,200 light-years away and roughly 32,000 times brighter than our Sun. It is already far beyond the stable middle age of a star's life. Massive stars burn through their fuel quickly, and Arneb is no exception. It is racing toward its eventual fate, a supernova explosion. On the scale of stars, its future is already written. Arneb is a star that was born massive, lived fast, and is heading toward a spectacular ending. It also has a companion, a much fainter star orbiting it, which makes it a binary system, though the companion contributes nothing visible to the naked eye and exists primarily to give astronomers something to calculate orbits about. Then there is Gamma Lepus, the quiet one. It does not have the dramatic color of the crimson star, and it does not have the enormous size of Arneb. Instead, Gamma Lepus is simply a nearby pleasant star, only about 29 light-years away, close enough to be one of our neighbors. It is a yellow-orange star, warmer in color than many of the bright blue-white stars that dominate the winter sky. Through binoculars, it becomes even more interesting because it has a nearby companion star visible in the same field of view, creating a simple, beautiful double-star pairing. Gamma Lepus does not demand attention. It does not announce itself, but sometimes those are the stars you end up remembering. In a constellation with a dying crimson star and a future supernova, Gamma Lepus is the quiet neighbor who just sits there, steady and unassuming, waiting for someone to notice. And beyond the stars themselves, Lepus has something even more surprising waiting, a deep sky object that has fascinated astronomers for more than a century. Lepus contains exactly one Messier object, and it's worth finding. Partly because it's beautiful, but mostly because it may have one of the most interesting travel histories of anything in this part of the sky. Messier 79 is a globular cluster, a giant spherical ball of ancient stars packed incredibly close together by gravity. Many contain hundreds of thousands of stars and formed more than 10 billion years ago. Messier 79 is about 41,000 light-years away. To put that into perspective, light from its cluster takes 41,000 years to reach us. The light entering your telescope began its journey when humans were still living in the Stone Age, before the pyramids, before written history, before the civilizations we know today. Through a larger telescope, the view becomes even more impressive. The fuzzy glow turns into a swarm of stars with a dense center surrounded by a halo of individual points of light. But the truly fascinating thing about Messier 79 is not what it looks like, it's where it comes from. Most globular clusters in the Milky Way gather near the galaxy's crowded center. Lepus, however, sits in a much quieter part of the sky, looking away from that busy region. So Messier 79 is already a little unusual before we even learn its big secret. It's like finding a packed stadium in the middle of a quiet neighborhood. You immediately start wondering why it's there. So maybe it isn't originally from our neighborhood at all. In the Canis Major episode, we talked about the Canis Major dwarf galaxy, a small galaxy that is being pulled apart and absorbed by the Milky Way. Some astronomers think Messier 79 may have been part of that galaxy long ago. Imagine a small galaxy with its own collection of stars, happily going about its business for billions of years. Then it gets too close to the Milky Way and gravity starts rewriting the arrangement. The smaller galaxy is stretched apart and some of its stars become part of our own. That is essentially how galaxies grow. They collide, they merge, they slowly become part of something larger. A galaxy collision sounds like two cosmic wrecking balls smashing together, but the reality is much gentler and much stranger. Galaxies are mostly empty space. It is less like two cars crashing and more like two enormous clouds slowly passing through each other, with gravity rearranging everything along the way. M79 may be one of those captured objects, a globular cluster that crossed from one galaxy into another and ended up becoming part of our own. A cosmic immigrant, a stellar traveler, a group of ancient stars that has gone farther than most of us will ever realize just to end up in a telescope pointed at the constellation of the Hare. And honestly, that feels appropriate. Lepus is a constellation that tends to be overlooked, but when you look closer, it keeps revealing surprises. Messier 79 is not the only thing hiding in Lepus. The constellation also contains several distant galaxies, including NGC 1784, a barred spiral galaxy roughly 85 million light-years away, and NGC 1821, an irregular galaxy situated approximately 174 million light-years away. Unlike the bright galaxies that dominate photographs, these two are difficult to observe. They require a larger telescope, dark skies, and patience. But that is part of the appeal. When you look at them, you are seeing light that began its journey millions of years ago, long before humans were looking through telescopes, long before our current civilizations existed, and long before anyone had given this patch of sky the name Lepus. And finally, Lepus gives us one of the strangest looking objects in the constellation, IC 418, better known as a spirograph nebula. The name is not just a poetic nickname, it actually looks like someone drew it. IC 418 is a planetary nebula, the remains of a dying star that has thrown its outer layers into space. At the center is a white dwarf, the leftover core of the star that once created this beautiful shell. As the star aged, it did not simply explode or disappear. It slowly shed layers of material, creating a series of expanding shells around itself. The result is a delicate pattern of rings and structures that, in photographs, resemble the geometric designs made by a spirograph. Except this one was created by a dying star. No human hand drew those patterns. No artist planned the design. It was created by the natural process of gravity, stellar winds, and a star reaching the end of its life. In a constellation that contains a crimson star, a possible visitor from another galaxy, and a hare that appears on the moon, the spirograph nebula feels like a perfect final chapter. Lepus keeps teaching the same lesson. Things that appear ordinary from a distance often become extraordinary when you look closer. The little hare beneath Orion's feet has been hiding a lot more than anyone expected. Lepus sits beneath Orion's feet. Small, quiet, and easy to overlook. Most people who explore the winter sky find Orion first, then Sirius, then the Winter Triangle, and never quite make their way down to the Hare hiding in the Hunter's shadow. And that's understandable. Orion announces himself. Sirius practically demands attention. Lepus requires you to slow down, look past the famous landmarks, and notice what is hiding below. Those who do find a constellation with far more to say than its size suggests. Here is the hare that became the symbol of perfect generosity in the Buddhist story of the Bodhisattva, the rabbit whose sacrifice was placed forever on the face of the moon. Here's the Hare of Leros, a reminder that even a charming idea can become a disaster when no one thinks about what happens next. Here is the Crimson Star, glowing an impossible deep red in a sky filled with colder blue-white stars. A globular cluster that may have arrived from another galaxy. A planetary nebula shaped like a cosmic drawing left behind by a dying star. And then there is the Hare itself. The same creature carries all of these meanings at once. A single animal, a dozen meanings. A small constellation quietly carrying some of the biggest ideas in the winter sky. And perhaps that is the most fitting thing about Lepus. The Hare has spent thousands of years hiding in Orion's shadow, but it was never as insignificant as it appeared. This has been Cosmic Tales. If you've enjoyed tonight's journey, follow and subscribe wherever you listen, and leave a rating if you have a moment. It genuinely helps. You can also find us on Instagram at Cosmic Tales Pod, where we post images of the constellations and deep sky objects we talk about so you can follow along visually. Until next time, keep looking up, because every star has a story waiting to be told.